We've been hearing, Commissioner Lucki, about a meeting that you had with some of the senior officers at H Division on April 28th, 2020. You know the meeting I'm talking about?
Yes.
And you've already testified about those matters before the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security?
Yes.
And obviously it was, it's been addressed by Chris Leather and Darren Campbell and Leah Scanlon. And given the information that's come forward on that, it appears that there's two very different accounts of what transpired in that meeting. Would that be fair?
They're not similar, but I wouldn't say in many respects that they're completely different either.
So it's your view
they're not. There are definitely some discrepancies. Yes.
There are definitely some discrepancies. In fact, there are a number of things that some of the people in Nova Scotia report as having been said that you've been quite clear just weren't said.
Yes.
And you've also been very clear that the purpose for that meeting was because your expectations were not being met in regards to communications and the flow of communications between the division and national headquarters.
Yes.
Your intention was to make the CEO and Chris Leather and Darren Campbell all aware of your expectations.
Yes.
And really all you had were some concerns about the accuracy of the information that was being provided to national headquarters that you were then passing on to the government.
No, not necessarily, because I was doing a lot of media as well. So there was the flow of information, the accuracy, the timing of the information.
There was a lot of issues.
So the rhythm, yes. And I know my communications folks had come to me with some concerns about just trying to really push the envelope again for them to be a bit more proactive and not so reactive, because it was difficult, and to be more prepared and getting them more prepared for media events.
Right. So your communications people were complaining about the job that H Division was doing in terms of communications.
They were expressing some frustrations. They knew that they didn't have the capacity. They were trying to help from a distance, but it wasn't working out so well.
But the general impression from your office and from your communications people was that there were serious problems going on with H Division and their communications. Right. Including their handling of things like press conferences and media, things like that. Yes?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, could we pull up Comm 0020441? Should be an email from Commissioner Lucki to Darren Campbell dated April 24th. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
And that'll be marked as 4229.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Commissioner, can you see that email?
If it could be made a bit
Sure.
bigger.
I think we can make it a little bit bigger for you if that helps.
Sorry.
It appears to be an email sent from you to Darren Campbell on the 26th of April, 2020.
Yes.
And if you see in that email, if we could go down, Madam Clerk. Yeah, sorry. If we go just a little bit farther, the one I want is the April 24th. Do you see that? April 24, 2020, 3:11 p.m. Again, from you to Darren Campbell, I believe. Great job on the press conference today. You represented the RCMP extremely well and provided the information that people need to answer, their many questions. And then you go on to talk about how the Minister of Public Safety, Bill Blair, passes on his gratitude for a job well done, that the Minister was impressed by the outstanding job that Darren Campbell did of explaining a very complex and tragic situation with calm and composure, and the fact that you very succinctly answered every question you received. So do I read this correctly that certainly on the 24th of April, you didn't have any concerns about the job that people like Darren Campbell were doing?
Not on that particular press event, no.
So the significant concerns about 𝐥𝐿𝐷's communications and dealings with the press, that would have been outside of what
This
you're
is
referring
one
to here.
particular event that I was commenting on, yes.
So by the time you get to the 28th, a few days later, that's when you feel it's necessary. I think you described it as the straw that broke the camel's back, because there's been all these issues ensuing between the 19th and the 28th.
And it wasn't in particular to Darren Campbell or Leah Scanlon or Lee Bergerman or Chris Leather. It was about their lack of capacity. It was about the fact that things were not flowing the way they ought to have. And it wasn't meeting my expectations, so I wanted to have that conversation.
And you weren't angry or upset?
Pardon?
You were not angry or upset?
No, I don't. I'm not a person who gets angry. I get frustrated. Sometimes I get disappointed. But to be angry, I'm not that type of person.
Right. I think you said before, that's just not in your DNA.
Yeah.
You're a calm person. Yeah. And you said that it was just a conversation that had to happen.
Yeah, I think I would be remiss if people aren't meeting my expectations. If I was to ignore it, how am I expecting anything to change if I don't bring it forward?
Well, it's your role, is it not?
Part of my role,
Right.
yes.
It's your role. If the people around you are not meeting your expectations and you have reasonable expectations to communicate to them, then that would be entirely within the scope of your role, would it not?
Yes.
Yes. Am I correct, though, that that particular meeting seemed to have a particular focus on one issue?
Well, it was the example that I used because that was the example that was sort of, like I said, the straw that broke the camel's back. I don't like to give misinformation or disinformation. It really bothers me when I do that. And if it's something that I can change, I need to change it. And so I felt that it could have been about widgets or this glass of water. It wasn't about the topic. It was about the fact that I asked a question, I got the wrong answer, I transmitted the wrong answer. And that is not something that I like to do. When I brief, I like to be as accurate as I can.
Right. It wasn't about the subject matter, the details of these firearms. It was about the accuracy of that information.
Yeah.
Right?
Part of it, yes.
Yeah. You weren't angry that that information hadn't been revealed. You were frustrated because the information that you had relayed was inaccurate. You had no vested interest in whether the information about the firearms was released publicly.
No, there was a ton of information that we were requesting at any given time, and by that point in time, there was only a few outstanding issues left that needed to be brought out in the public, and weapons was one, the chronology of events, and there was a few things about the perpetrator themselves that were still outstanding. So there was a few things that needed to be addressed in media because we were getting a ton of questions.
It strikes me as particularly reasonable that if you were getting inaccurate information from your subordinates, that would be something that you would raise in a meeting to see if we can address that and ensure that that's going forward. But in your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, you said, and I'm quoting, and for the benefit of my friends, I'm at page 84, "We talk about that meeting. It sickens me. When I think about it before I go to bed, I can't sleep. I don't even like talking about it." And what I wonder is, if we're simply talking about having a calm conversation with subordinates to address a fairly mundane issue about the fact that, we've had some communications mix-up, why would that prevent you from sleeping? Why would it sicken you to think about that meeting?
It sickens me because the letter I got a year later. That's what sickens me. If I had known that I had that negative effect on Ms. Scanlon, if I had caused her sadness or grief or anxiety or any one of those negative emotions, I would have wanted to have that conversation right away, the next day. Make the right wrong. That's who I am. I'm not afraid to admit if I could have been more sensitive. I look at it from a leadership point of view. I forget, first of all, the power of the commissioner's office. Sometimes I even forget I'm the commissioner. honestly, because I know I like to connect with people. I could have been more sensitive. I could have tempered my comments with more positiveness. There's a few things, but I was truly frustrated. I was hurt that the negative narrative on my people, watching it happen when I knew they did the best they could with the circumstances they faced, and watching that happen before my eyes and feeling completely powerless, it was difficult. It was difficult as a leader. And I ought to have maybe just waited 24 hours. Maybe I should have only talked to the commanding officer. But I felt that, it was so difficult in those days. We weren't face to face. I had no indication of body language. It was difficult. And it was difficult because when I found out a year later the effect it had on Ms. Scanlon, I don't wake up in the morning and say I want to do that to any person. I don't want to hurt anybody. So that's why when I replay that meeting and I think of the things that I could have done better as a leader, I know that I still needed to outline the problems and I still needed to outline my expectations, but I could have done it differently. And that's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Madam Registrar, if we could go to Comm 0058827, that would be the letter from Leah Scanlon. You're referring to the letter that you got from Leah Scanlon about a year later, April of 2021. And I understand that up to that point, you had no awareness that there had been any issue with that phone call.
None.
And I think you'd also testified that part of the issue may have been that because it was by teleconference and there was no Teams or Zoom, that you couldn't gauge body language.
Well, also, all the people in Ottawa, we were all at our own locations, our homes, most of us, and the group in Nova Scotia was all together, and it was post that big media event. So of course, it was very emotional for them. They just came off of a very successful media event, and here I came in and burst their bubble by outlining my expectations. It wasn't an easy conversation to have. Like I said in other testimony, I was always framing things about the issues and how it made me feel. I was very calm about it. So when I saw some of the comments that she said in her letter, I was shocked because that's not how it happened. That's not how I saw it happen. And I verified with people that were at the meeting to see if I missed something, if I had zero self-awareness. And people said I didn't say certain things or I didn't do certain things. I knew I hadn't, but of course you want to validate that. But even to this day, I don't even want to read the letter. I don't even want to see the letter.
Well, I can read it for you. In the letter from Ms. Scanlon, she suggests that your conduct in that meeting was appalling, inappropriate, unprofessional, extremely belittling. And I assume that your position is that that bears no resemblance to the meeting that you were a part of.
I respect your opinion. I completely disagree with it.
See, that's my understanding from listening to your 𝐥𝐶𝐄 evidence is that your position is that they remember the meeting one way and I remember it a different way. And maybe it's because we're all in different places and on the phone, I couldn't see body language and there was some misunderstanding, but wires got crossed. Is that generally how you would resolve the issue?
No, I know what I said. I know how I said it.
And you know that it's not the things that Ms. Scanlon is suggesting that you said?
According to her letter, no.
Right. So you can see why there are some that, given the disparity between these two reports, have concerns that perhaps somebody isn't being entirely candid or transparent about what was said at that meeting. You can understand that because of the issue of reconciling those two accounts?
Yeah, I do. And obviously everybody has a different opinion. And like I said, I respect it. I know that I was made privy to some of her notes that she made during that meeting, and it wasn't reflective of any of this. So it sort of surprised me. And I, like I said, I find it extremely hurtful. And that's not the person I am, and I would never say that, and I never said that.
No,
and
which raises the question, why is Ms. Scanlon
I don't know.
saying that? Yeah. I mean, Ms. Scanlon suggests at 3 points in that letter that while berating the H Division team, that you told them that they had let the boys down, which she interpreted as being reference to the Blair and McCulley children. And you categorically didn't say those words.
If she had just put "let the boys down," I would have no idea what that meant, and it's only in that letter that I know what it meant. I had no idea, and that's why I say how hurtful it is, because I'm not a hurtful person, and for her to say that and knowing I didn't say that, but you know what, I cannot walk an inch in Miss Scanlon's shoes. I can't walk a mile. I can't walk anything. She was on the ground. She knew the people. She went through a lot of things that obviously I didn't. I can't imagine what she's going through, what she went through. And so when I read the letter, I really just thought maybe it's just a way for her to deal with a bunch of different things. I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. But it was around the 1-year anniversary. I just can't imagine what the things that she went through, what she saw, what she had to report on. That's got to take its toll on people.
Oh, I have no doubt, and certainly we can never walk in the shoes of anyone else, but that's not what we're talking about. By your evidence, Ms. Scanlon is reporting things that didn't happen. You can walk a mile in her shoes to the extent that you were in the meeting. We weren't there.
Yeah.
And you would know better than anybody whether those things were said or not. And to the best of your understanding, it sounds like Ms. Scanlon was making things up.
Well, there are things like when Ms. Scanlon, for instance, talks about, when we make reference to things like political interference, she was never in any of the conversations that I was in. So for her to have that view, I don't know where she would get that view.
Right.
So everybody's entitled to their perspective and their opinion. And like I said, I respect it. I just don't agree with it.
Yeah,
That is not how it happened.
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but surely we don't have different sets of facts. Something was either said or it wasn't said, right? There's no my truth and your truth. There's just the truth.
Well, in policing, we often say there's 3 sides to a story, but I just say that, it's perception. It's what was going through your mind during that day can affect your perception of words. I'm not saying that, I would never want to call anybody a liar. I just don't think that way. Like I said, I know what I said and I know what I didn't say.
Yeah, and I think you also suggested that there were other people on that call that you went to and they sort of agreed with your recollection.
Yes.
And can I assume that those people were all in Ottawa?
Yes.
So those were all people that work on your team?
They're in Ottawa, yes.
Yeah.
Brian Brennan and Sharon Tessier. And
Dan Bryan?
yes.
Right. And you're aware that we've heard from Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Scanlon. Mm-hmm. And each of them have reported a version of the conversation that's quite consistent. You know that?
I know that they've talked about it, yeah, from their perception and their point of view, yes.
And that there's some understanding that their recollection, everybody in Nova Scotia seems to have heard a very different conversation than the one that you and your staff participated in. Yes?
Yes.
Yeah.
There are certain things in Ms. Scanlon's letter that other people in Nova Scotia have not spoken about, so I'm not sure. So that's why I struggle with everything. I struggle with what those words are. They're, like I said, I find it extremely hurtful.
I think you said that if you had known the impact that your words had back at the time, you would have fixed it the next day. You would have made it right.
Yeah, I was told that people left in, or a person left in tears, I think it was.
Ms. Scanlon, yeah.
Yeah, I would never, today, I don't want anybody here leaving in tears. I don't want anybody leaving in tears, no matter how bad a situation is. So to hear that she left in tears saddens me, because then I would love to have a conversation with her, and I have reached out to her.
So presumably when you got that letter in April 2021, the first thing you did was pick up the phone and call Ms. Scanlon.
No. I read it, I absorbed it, I wondered where it was coming from. I looked at the calendar, it was almost to the 1-year anniversary. Ms. Scanlon wasn't working at the time. I tried to write a letter back. I wrote one several times, rewrote it several times. And I thought to myself, there wasn't anything that I could say in that letter that I felt that would change things for her or make her think differently or make her take her hurt away. I didn't think I could do that for her. And so I thought the best thing I could do was speak to her in person. And I thought about it, and the only reason I didn't was, first of all, she wasn't at work, and I didn't want to affect her wellness plan. The second reason was that, again, the integrity of the Mass Casualty Commission. I didn't want to in any way have people feel that their testimony was being influenced by the Commissioner of the RCMP. So I felt it was best just to wait till people's testimony was done. And that's what I did in the case of 𝐿IA. As soon as her testimony was done, again, I'm very conscious of trauma and hurt and not wanting to be that person. So I got somebody who knew her to reach out to her so that she wouldn't receive an email from the Commissioner of the RCMP and feel anxiety of any sort. I had the person reach out to her to see if she would like to meet with me or give her the option of meeting with me when I went down to Nova Scotia, and she chose not to.
That was in June,
Yes,
right? But she sent you that letter back
yes.
in April of 2021.
Yeah, she hadn't testified yet. She had given statements but hadn't testified until in this last 6 months, I believe.
Right around the time that Darren Campbell's notes became public as part of this public inquiry.
Sorry?
Is that when you reached out to Ms. Scanlon?
No, I reached out just before I was going to Nova Scotia, actually, and when she was finished her testimony, she had finished. There was question that she might go back for a second testimony, so I was waiting till it was done. And I knew that I was going to Nova Scotia in June, so that's when I had planned to meet.
So you received the letter in April of 2021, and for various reasons, you didn't make any attempt to make it right.
No, I wrote the letter, but I didn't send it.
You have that letter?
Not with me, no.
And do you have a draft of it?
I believe so. I still kept it, I think.
Would you be willing to produce that letter?
Yeah.
I'll ask you to undertake to produce the draft letter or any drafts you have that you were.
I think you should direct that to council, Mr. Scott.
We'll take that under advisement for now. We'll deal with it at the end of the proceedings today.
Thank you.
So my question is, if a civilian employee of yours writes you a letter that is not simply expressing, you've said some things that have hurt me, but is rather plainly accusing you of having acted in a way that was appalling, inappropriate, unprofessional, belittling, and then is attributing things to you that you know firsthand are factually false. She's suggesting that you said things that you just didn't say. How does that not warrant immediately picking up the phone and saying, what is this letter? What are you talking about? I don't know what room you were in, but I was part of that conversation and I didn't say any of those things.
Why would I want to do that at that point in time when Ms. Scanlon was dealing with her own wellness issues? Why would I want to do that at that time? That's the questions I asked myself, and I didn't feel it was appropriate. I did not want to cause her any more hurt. I wanted her to get well. I wanted her to come back to work. I wanted a lot of things. And so for me to pick up the phone, as you suggest, I would never do that.
Your concern was that any of these things that Ms. Scanlon or others may have imagined were a result of perhaps some sort of illness or trauma? Or?
No, my concern was for Miss 𝐿IA Scanlon, for her to get better, for me to try to explain things or try to have that conversation would be only self-serving, and it wouldn't do anything for Ms. Scanlon, the way you suggested.
Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Scanlon all seem to be under the impression in that meeting you were very clear that you were upset about this information, details about the firearms not being released because it was tied to pending gun legislation from the Liberal government.
It was a part of a mandate letter and legislation, yes, but that wasn't, it wasn't about, like I said, it was just about the erroneous information that I was given.
Yeah, so you recall mentioning why it was that the government had wanted that information released?
When I talked about the fact that I was told that the information would be part and parcel of the media, and the fact that the government asked me if it was going to be part of it, I explained that obviously it's important to them because they're in the midst of, or they actually had legislation already completed, but it was an interest to them, just like any other unfortunate event around the world. They reach in during the Christchurch crisis. They've reached in at other active shooters in and around North America. Whenever those things have happened, they've requested the same type of information, wanting to know more.
What you said in your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission was, I was explaining why it was important to the government. Don't be surprised that they are asking for this information because the mandate letter for the minister is gun legislation and gun banning. He's interested in that stuff.
Yeah.
Does that sum it up?
Yeah, that's why I asked for the information on the 23rd.
Right. So my question is, if the only reason we're having this meeting and there's an issue and you're feeling frustrated and trying to express your expectations is because of the accuracy of the information that's being provided. And as you've said, you have no vested interest in whether that information is disclosed or not. You just want to make sure that you're giving accurate information to the government. Then why in that meeting would you be stressing the reason why it was so important that information be released publicly, that the government wanted it released because it was tied to their pending gun legislation?
No, not at all. It was about all of the issues that we were having about communication. That was but one of many examples. Many of the things were brought to light through our comms to their comms, but there was many issues with communications. Like I stated earlier in some of my testimony, in normal circumstances, I would get 2 to 3 situational reports a day. I wasn't getting that. We weren't getting the information that we needed. I was doing a lot of media, and it was very difficult, and I've never usually in the position where I actually have to ask for the information. It usually just comes free-flowing through a process and through a rhythm, and that rhythm wasn't there. I wanted, again, them to be more proactive and not reactive. We've talked about that. They weren't meeting the expectations that I would expect in a calm situation.
We don't need to pull it up, but in an email to H Division on April 23rd, I think you've seen it, where you're expressing GOC and Minister are anxiously awaiting, talking about we need this information about the gun details. You sent that email to Commissioner Bergerman?
Commanding Officer.
Commanding Officer.
Yeah. We were asking, there was that, and there was, I think at another time, I had also asked about the chronology. There was a bunch of different little outstanding ones, but one of them was the weapons.
Right.
In that particular email, yes.
And then right around the same time, you called Chris Leather directly to inquire about when are we going to get the information about the firearms.
I don't recall that phone call either.
You aware that when Chief Superintendent Leather was here, he testified that he got a call from you?
Yeah, that's when I heard
Right.
about it. I didn't.
You don't dispute that?
I have no recollection of that phone call.
No. And he also said that he'd never received a phone call from you Prior to that, normally communication would have gone obviously to the commanding officer.
It's not unusual for me to reach out to CROPS officers, criminal operations officers, sorry.
Had you ever called Chris Leather before that day?
No, I didn't realize I called him that day.
Were you aware that Deputy Commissioner Brennan, who reports directly to you, had contacted Leah Scanlon
No,
to...
I wasn't made aware of that.
Let me ask the question, to ask for details about the firearms.
No, I wasn't made aware of that, only through this process.
Sharon Tessier is your strategic communications, or at the time was your strategic
The director.
communications director, or
Yeah, Director of Strategic Communications.
were you aware that during the press conference on April 28th, the one where Darren Campbell didn't mention the guns, were you aware that Sharon Tessier was emailing Leah Scanlon in real time?
No.
Yeah. I know we were having some trouble with the documents earlier, but for the record, I'm referring to Comm 0023788, which appears to be an email from Sharon Tessier to Leah Scanlon at 16:36 hours, which would be 4:36 p.m. And it says, "Please tell me Darren is going to mention the guns. My phone is lighting up." Were you aware of her sending that message, or why she would be sending that message?
No, the only reason I could think of is that she told me that the weapons were going to be part of the media release, and maybe because she told that to me and it wasn't happening, maybe she felt an obligation. I'm not sure. Like I said, it was a question. It wasn't, are the guns going to be mentioned in the media release? It wasn't bigger than what everybody is making it out to. It's becoming very politicized, this whole event, as far as I'm concerned, because it was not nearly as big as you're making it sound. It was very, are they going to mention it? Because there was so many other things. We talked about the replica vehicle. We talked about the replica uniforms. We talked about the background of the perpetrator. We talked about the event at the fire hall. We talked about the sequence of events, the number of deceased. There was a ton of information that was going back and forth. And there was some outstanding information that was left. And so I had told at some point that they were having a big press event in Nova Scotia that was going to cover all of the outstanding issues. That was what I was led to believe, that this was going to be the big one. And so when, like I said, there was different speaking notes. I think I read the first one. I never read anything after that. I assumed that everything was going to be. I didn't see issues with certain details on the guns myself, but it didn't matter to me. It was just getting the information out. I look back and I think to myself, I know that in the first media I did with Minister Blair, I think half of it was directed to him about weapons. I know that I had another media with another outlet, and they were asking about that as well. It was obviously a topic that was interest to everybody, as was many other topics, but most of it got released as the week had gone by. So when the minister asked, or not even the minister's chief of staff asked if the details for the weapons were going to be released, I had no idea. I wasn't in the details of that media event at all. I asked the question, I got the answer, I transmitted the answer. If I had known that they weren't going to be released, I would have said, sorry, they're not going to be released. That was the end of it. At the end of all of this, when they said, when I realized it wasn't released and it was brought out through, I think, a Q&A, I said, yeah, not the execution we're expecting. It's not, I think later on I said, it's not going to be released. That was the end of that conversation. There was never mention about it again. So I'm trying to explain myself 7 different ways from Sunday here. I find myself a little bit frustrated because honestly, I know the conversations I had with the minister. I know the conversations I had with the minister's staff, with the deputy minister, the national security advisor. There was never any direction provided, no interference, no political pressure. Was there pressure? Yeah, there was a lot of pressure, most of it coming from the media itself. But as far as what people think happened, it didn't. And Minister Blair, of all people, is very cognizant of interference because he himself was the chief of police of Toronto. very often we have meetings, and when we have ministers outside of the RCMP or outside of the portfolio, there's always reminders about that. So I'm trying to answer the questions to the best of my ability, but I don't think I'm communicating properly because it seems to still be an issue, and I'm sorry if I'm trying to clarify myself, but
Do you remember what the question was?
no. Sorry.
You weren't aware that Sharon Tessier sent an email to Leah Scanlon at 4:36 p.m. saying, please tell me Darren is going to mention the guns. My phone is lighting up.
No, I wasn't aware.
That's the answer, isn't it? Is no.
No.
Right. And do you know, if it wasn't a big deal and it wasn't that important and it's being blown out of proportion, why is Sharon Tessier's phone lighting up?
I have no idea. You'd have to ask Sharon Tessier. Like I
Was it
said,
you calling her?
I doubt it. I didn't even watch the full media event. I started to watch it, and I think there was a lot of other things going on in the RCMP at that point in time, unfortunately, with COVID and still a bunch of other events. So.
Sure. Were you aware that a few minutes later at 4:49, Ms. Tessier sent another email to Ms. Scanlon saying, is there any way to relay to Jennifer/Darren the need to talk about the guns?
No, I wasn't aware of that.
I note that she's saying the need to talk to the guns, and we can presume that by Jennifer, she's referring to Jennifer Clark and Campbell being Darren Campbell. Those messages weren't sent at your direction?
No.
No. It does seem, however, though, that given the communication, that there appears to be a great deal of concern at that point that this information isn't going to be released publicly.
Like I said, the only reason I can think that Sharon is sending those messages is because she already told me that the weapons were going to be part of the media event, and that I transmitted that information up. And so maybe because she was misinformed, or she misinformed me, that she was trying to correct that, I'm not sure.
And based on your previous testimony and when you spoke at 𝐂𝐂𝐅𝐑, is it fair to say that your position has always been that, number one, you can confirm that Minister Blair never directed you to release any information? Correct?
He has never directed
No, he's
me.
never ordered you to do anything, and you recognize that would be incredibly inappropriate, and it would be your responsibility at that point to say no.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay. And I think in your preamble to your 𝐂𝐂𝐅𝐑 testimony, you said, specifically, I was not directed to publicly release information about weapons used by the perpetrator to help advance pending gun control legislation. But you do agree that through the government, the minister, chief of staff, the prime minister's office, it was a request. Can this information be released publicly at
No.
the press conference? No.
No, it wasn't that. They were asking if it was going to be part of the media event, the big media event that day.
So the distinction you're drawing is between the direction or an order, which is improper, and somebody simply asking...
When somebody says, can you do that? That's, to me, direction, and it wasn't that at all. It was just an if. It was, is that information going to be part of that media event?
Commissioner
So
Lucki,
that's why I'm having a difficult time with your questions.
you understood that...
There was no benefit for the
Let me
government.
ask the question. You understood that the question was, even if it was framed as, is that information going to be released, the message was, we'd really like to have that information released.
I didn't see it like that.
No? You
No.
thought it was just out of sheer curiosity.
No, because it was one of the outstanding items that still
Right.
wasn't out in the public. And we had made it very clear to the government that you could not talk about anything until the RCMP released the information. Each division on the ground had a very specific protocol of the release of the information. They wanted a no-surprise environment, as did I. So until they released it, none of the government officials could speak about it or release it in their media events.
Right, but I guess my question is then, if you're suggesting that you had no idea why they were asking for it, it was just a question, is this going to be included or not? Then why on the 28th, when you're meeting with H Division, are you telling them this is tied to pending gun legislation?
Well, because it was about the weapons. So it was really, like I said, it wasn't, the specific meeting was the fact that I gave the wrong information is what frustrated me the most. And it was yet another example of issues with communication. So when I am asked a question and I give the wrong answer, I don't like to do that. I don't want to give misinformation. There's enough misinformation out there. I don't want to be the perpetrator of that. So when I gave the misinformation, that's the part that frustrated me. And it was, again, part of many other issues. And so it was watching things happen that we could be better at. We could be better at those communications. And the weapons was but one example. And because that was the most recent example, that's the one I spoke about.
My question, Commissioner, was if your understanding was that you were being asked, that you didn't know why you were being asked for this information or what the purpose was, then why in that meeting are you expressly telling Darren Campbell, wait for me to ask a question, Darren Campbell and Chris Leather and Leah Skane, you're telling them you don't understand how important this is, it's tied to pending gun legislation?
Because the question that was asked to me was about the weapons, that's why I said, that's why they asked if the weapons would be included. I'm guessing because it's part of their mandate and it's part of legislation. So I was tying it to the reason why they asked if the information of the weapons would be included in the release.
You understood what the interest was in that information.
And I was just expressing what I felt was their interest in that information being part of it. And they're asking if it's part of it. I'm advised yes. I tell them yes. And like I said, that was the end of those conversations. The fact of the matter was that it was not an issue after that. As soon as that was done, there was no question the day after or the day after that of the government saying, hey, are you having another press release? Are you going to release the guns? There was nothing like that. It was over, and I said, yeah, they're not talking about that. And it was actually at that meeting on the 28th when Darren Campbell told me that it was part of another investigation. So that's when that was the end of it. Up to that point, I didn't connect it because I knew the perpetrator was deceased. I didn't connect it to that at all.
To be fair, you were more intimately involved with that pending gun legislation than simply being aware that it was part of the minister's mandate, weren't you?
No, there was a lot of briefings, but I usually wasn't the ones doing it. We have 2 or 3 experts that do it. The odd time I was briefing, but I'm not a gun expert by any means.
Yeah, under the Firearms Act, the RCMP Commissioner also serves as the Chief Executive of the Canadian Firearms Program. Isn't that right?
I'm the Commissioner of the Firearms Program,
Right.
yes.
Making you the most senior administrator with respect to the Firearms Act in Canada.
Yes, but not the most senior subject matter expert on those, all things guns.
Right, and you would say that you had been working with the Liberal government for 2 to 3 years on gun legislation, providing them with information on different guns.
Many, like the RCMP, not me personally. This has been going on for 2-3 years at least. There are briefings that are given, but we have 2 or 3, like I said, subject matter experts. I very rarely brief on anything to do with the guns.
You recall doing an interview with my colleague, Ms. Young, back on Thursday, August 4th, 2022?
With who?
With Ms. Young?
Oh, yes.
I believe you were interviewed by Rachel Young.
Yes.
And I'm going to suggest to you that at page 26 of your transcript, you said, it says, Commissioner Brenda Lucki, yeah, of course, they were curious about the guns. That's part of their mandate. But the gun legislation had already been presented. We've been working with them for 2 or 3 years on gun legislation. So we've been providing them with information on different guns, what happened in Christchurch, what happened in this situation, right? So you were consulted and participated in the guns legislation that was announced on May 1st, 2020.
Like I said, I wasn't directly involved. There was times early on where I was part of the briefings, but for the most part, like I said before, there was 2 or 3 subject matter experts that were the leaders of those briefing sessions that have the expertise in firearms and firearms, everything firearms. I am so not that person. I'm just not an expert in firearms.
You understood enough to know that the centerpiece of that legislation was effectively banning certain makes and models of firearms.
It was a banning of firearms.
Right.
Yes.
So certain firearms that Canadians would have otherwise legally been able to possess if they had the requisite licensing would now be on a list of prohibited firearms.
I'm not even that, I'm ashamed to say, I'm not even that intimately involved with firearms, even at that level. Like I said, there's so many aspects to firearms and lists and the categories and the classifications. I don't know that stuff.
Madam Registrar, if we could go to Comm 00599637. That should be an email from you, Commissioner Lucki, to on April 23rd, forwarding the firearms information on to, I believe, the Minister's Chief of Staff. And you had cut and paste that from information that was received from H Division, if I understood.
Yes.
If we could go down. Right there. So we see April 23rd, 2020 at 3:58 p.m. from Brenda Lucki. 𝐥𝐶𝐝, that's the Minister's Chief of Staff?
Yes.
Right. And you're providing her with the information that you had received from H Division?
Yes.
Right. And you've listed out the various firearms that were seized from the perpetrator when he was killed?
Yes.
You also, I just want to direct your attention down towards the bottom. It says preliminary trace results are as follows. Colt carbine, sourced at a gun shop in California, and then 2 Ruger Mini 14, and there's reference to the Ruger P89. So, do I understand correctly that at that time, what is this, the 23rd, when you're sending this information about the firearms that were involved, the RCMP was fully aware that the perpetrator did not have any sort of firearms license or certification, and for the most part had acquired these firearms illegally and out of country?
I believe at that point that we did know that he didn't have a license. It wasn't, without the license, I would say he's obtaining them illegally.
The working theory that I know the investigation hasn't been closed, but the working theory at the time was that he had smuggled illegal firearms in. He had acquired firearms illegally in the United States and Maine, had smuggled them across the border, and was in about 5 different ways illegally in possession of firearms.
Yeah, I didn't know the details that you're specifically. I don't believe I was given.
Well, they're right
specific.
there in the email that you sent.
No, but it was this could have, or this would thus be unlawfully smuggled into Canada, those things?
I'll direct you down to the bottom where it says Glock 23, sourced to a gun shop in Maine. This would have been unlawfully smuggled into Canada. That's reasonably clear,
Yeah.
isn't it? Right.
Like I said, that was information I received, yes.
And as the head of the firearms program in Canada, presumably you understand that without a PAL, either restricted or non-restricted, in any way that perpetrator is in possession of firearms, it's a criminal offense.
Yes.
And to the extent that he acquires ammunition is a criminal offense.
Yes.
And to the extent that any license holder knowingly assists him in acquiring the materials used as part of his
I have to say, I don't know those laws intimately. I know that there are obviously illegalities when you don't have the proper licensing. I know that. Whether the restricted, the prohibited, what people can and cannot do with a license, I don't intimately know those, but what you're saying, I'm trusting that it's true. I don't want to say that, yes, in fact, because
All right. The reason I'm asking is that you know, while it seems in these communications, particularly in the meeting you had on the 28th with H Division, the suggestion that it's obvious that, you know, why the government is looking for this information is tied to pending gun legislation. What I was hoping that you could help me with was, what is the connection? What is the connection between that legislation and what happened here in Nova Scotia, beyond the fact that firearms are involved?
I wouldn't do it justice to make that connection for you.
Because to the best of your understanding, that legislation wasn't in any way aimed at closing any loopholes or doing anything that would have in any way helped prevent the perpetrator from committing his crimes here, right?
I can't answer, like I said, I can't answer those questions.
You're not aware if any efforts were taken to beef up things like border security and address issues of smuggling firearms illegally over the border?
Sorry, what was the question?
You're not aware of anything in that proposed legislation at the time that would have addressed issues like illegal smuggling of firearms, things that would have prevented the perpetrator from bringing a Colt carbine across the border?
I just know in general that the government has, obviously they're looking at smuggling, they're looking at guns and gangs, and they're looking at banning certain firearms in a general sense in legislation.
You can't point to anything that would suggest that there's a logical connection between what happened here in Nova Scotia and those issues being addressed by that legislation, the legislation that was announced on May 1st, 2020.
No, I wouldn't. Sorry.
And you can appreciate that there are those that'd be concerned that the optics of that, or that the collective grief and pain of my clients and others was being exploited
I
for the
wouldn't. Sorry.
to affect the crass political objectives of legislatures. You could see why that would be a very serious issue and one that we would be very interested in.
I could see that as being an issue, but it's not something that is at all, when you talk about that I could see the optics of that. Absolutely, but I couldn't see it. I can't make that connection for you.
Sorry, Mr. Scott, it's 5:30. I'm presuming you're wrapping up. Or maybe you could tell us where you are in the.
I'm happy to keep going.
I'm sorry?
I'm happy to keep going if the commissioners will hear me.
Sure. How much longer do you think you'll be?
Not long.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Registrar, can we go to Comm 00596637? I believe is that the email that we're just looking at, the April 23rd email. We go down, please. Right there, and if we could zoom in. Now, Commissioner Lucki, you see about 3 lines down in bold, you write, please do not disseminate further, do not share this information past the Prime Minister and the PM as is directly related to this active investigation. And that's on the 23rd of April, correct?
Yes.
Right. You understood that this was information tied to an active investigation, and while you obviously report up and keep those in government and the public safety minister apprised, you didn't want to compromise the integrity of the investigation by having that disseminated more widely, right?
That was why it was put there, yes.
Right. And I think with respect to the April 28th press conference and subsequent meeting you had with H Division, when you were interviewed by the Mass Casualty Commission, the suggestion was as soon as Darren Campbell said to you, this is part of an active investigation, that's why I don't want to disclose it. Your response was, that's it, I don't need it. I asked for it because the government wanted to know if it was coming up, but if you're telling me that this is for an active investigation, That's it. I'll report that back, and we'll never ask for it again, right?
Yeah, I didn't connect it was kind of odd because I was thinking more about the deceased and the connection with the firearms to the deceased and the use of those firearms. I wasn't connecting it to auxiliary sort of investigations. And so that's the investigation that I was thinking of. I wasn't thinking of the smuggling. I was thinking more about connecting the guns to the perpetrator.
Right. In your interview with the Mass Casualty Commission, what you said, and I'm at page 38, as soon as he said that, that was it. You know what? Don't need it. Don't need any information on the guns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was a moot point then because, but I still think that now the benefit of hindsight, I think things like the classification of guns there's certain information that may have been able to be shared that may not compromise. I'm saying that now. I wasn't thinking that then, but I was thinking, how do we push the envelope a bit more so that, and most recently, of course, seeing some of the active shooters in the States and how they release information. So I've been thinking a lot about it,
Right.
wondering how we can be more transparent in that regard.
But no matter how you think about it, if the information is, tied to an active investigation that either you believe or somebody who's on the ground believes will impact the integrity of the investigation, obviously that supersedes other considerations, and that's the end of the conversation, right?
Yeah, but sometimes sometimes we automatically assume we can't release any information because something's under investigation. But I think sometimes we have to flush through it and think about, is it an absolute, or is there things that may or may not be able to be released that wouldn't compromise it to provide that information to the public? So that's what I meant by how I think of it and trying to push the envelope a little bit.
Sure. On April 23rd, when you're sending information to the Minister of Public Safety, you're not saying, well, maybe we can flush this through and find out what information that we can. What you're saying is don't release this. It's part of an active investigation.
No, I'm saying that I think that
Yeah.
now, and I think that's why we try to provide that sort of training to the commanding officers. We provide templates for them to be able to say more than just the fact that something's under investigation. Because we've seen it done in other police agencies across Canada where something goes on and they seem to be able to talk more about things. And for some reason in the RCMP, we're very guarded about our communications under the umbrella of an investigation. So trying to figure out how we can push the envelope a little bit more.
Right. Presumably, if you're telling the minister on the 23rd that don't release it's part of an active investigation, it wasn't your impression by the time you got to the 28th of April that somehow that investigation had been wrapped up?
No, my comms people were talking about how we could provide as much information as possible, even under an umbrella of an investigation. That was part of the conversations. I wasn't privy to a lot of it, but I know that they were trying to get more information instead of waiting for just the one, like I said, the one event.
Who was part of those conversations?
Well, the person I spoke with was Sharon Tessier mostly with just, I know that was when she was expressing some of the frustration about trying to get more comms out and being more in front of the camera and being more, providing more information.
And that wasn't those efforts to see maybe if we can find something, and even though a couple of days ago we knew it was part of an active investigation, that was just out of nothing other than a desire to ensure that the RCMP was being as transparent and providing as much information to the Canadian public as was possible. It had nothing to do with a particular interest that the government had in getting the make, model, and caliber of those firearms out into the public discourse.
Sorry, what's your question?
My question is that, are you suggesting that the only reason those conversations were being had about, is there anything we can do here to get that information out? It's not because there was any particular interest in
No, it wasn't
This-
just about the guns. It was about all kinds of information. Like you spoke about earlier, you know, the number of deceased and a chronology, just getting the more information out as and when it happened. There was often, I recall in one media event where I had said, I believe that there was 13 deceased, and in the same media event, the last line from the reporter was that there was 16. So there was all kinds of, you know, it seemed like inaccuracies or things that maybe it was just happening too fast, I'm not sure. But obviously they were having trouble being accurate with the information.
Should we be at all concerned that we've heard from both Darren Campbell and Chris Leather the suggestion that they're concerned that there was political interference, and I should add retired Assistant Commissioner Berger to that list as well, of people who were on that call and viewed it as being either improper interference in their investigation or at least attempted. Should we be concerned about that?
You should be concerned if they were in the meetings. They weren't in any meetings that would suggest that. They have no direct knowledge of any of that. The fact is, I had many conversations with the minister or the minister's staff, and there was no such interference, there was no such direction, and there was no such political pressure.
They were in the meeting with you.
But they were never in any of the meetings that I had with, so I'm really the only person that can tell you if I was getting direction or if I was getting interference from the minister's office. I'm the only one who can tell you that. They weren't in any of those meetings with any of the government officials. So for them to connect the dots in the way that they connected them, obviously that's their opinion, but it's not based on fact.
Right. You understand that it would be equally concerning if, whether you were directed or ordered or not, if you in your role as the Commissioner of the RCMP were using that position to try to affect certain outcomes for the government, that would be interference as well. You appreciate that, don't you?
I appreciate that, and that wasn't done.
Because all that was happening was what we were asking about whether that information, we weren't directing, and that's the distinction you draw. It's fair ball to simply ask, is that information going to be released? It's a very different thing to order it, right?
There was no direction provided.
I know, but my question is, that's the distinction you're drawing. It's between asking about it and directing that it be done.
That's a big distinction, yes.
Right, but you'll agree with me that sometimes when people are in positions of power, when they ask a question, it's not really a request.
I didn't ask the question, though. It was the communications person who asked the question. I didn't ask the question to the group. I asked my communications person, are the weapons going to be part of the media event? My comms person went to somewhere in Nova Scotia. I'm imagining they went to their comms people and asked the question. She came back and said, yes, it will. I transmitted that information.
The question was asked, and the question was, will no one rid me of this troublesome priest?
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Because it was a question, you view that as being perfectly fine. You were simply irritated that you got the wrong information from Sharon Tessier at the end of the day.
That was the question I asked Sharon Tessier, yes.
And did you ever apologize to anybody at H Division for the fact that, as it turns out, they never said that they were going to release that information at the 28th. In fact, it was just a miscommunication that Ms. Tessier had.
And that was pointed out in the meeting on the 28th that at that point, I think it was Ms. Tessier who pointed out that she gave me the wrong information.
Then why didn't you take the time to say, listen, guys, I had it all wrong here. I thought you would agree that you were going to put this out and you had given me incorrect information, but I now realize that I'll take this up with Ms. Tessier later. That would have been a pretty reasonable response given the circumstances, and obviously Darren Campbell didn't do anything wrong. He was very clear about why he didn't release that information.
Yeah.
But you didn't do that, did you?
I could have, yes, I could
You
have.
could have, but that's
And
a
I
far
didn't.
away from you didn't.
No, and I didn't. No, you're absolutely right.
I appreciate your time, Commissioner, and those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Scott.